Well, hello everyone. I'm Zach Phillips, and I'm here with the great San Diego-based producer, arranger, guitarist, Mr. Gregg Montante. He's also a fantastic bassist, recording engineer,
That's a
composer.
stretch.
I know, what doesn't this guy do, right? Oh yeah, and we happen to work together on my latest album, The Wine of Youth, and today we're going to talk about it,
Yes.
along with many, many other topics. Greg, I just realized with COVID-19, it's been what, like 4 or 5 months since I've actually seen you. So this is good. You good?
Oh my God. Yeah, yeah. And if you hear stuff in the background, like chain stuff, that's my dogs running around in the backyard.
Well, Finn was part of the making of The Wine of Youth. He was the mascot. So,
Yes.
you know, non-humans played a role in that album, at least in terms of moral support. And my cats will be howling outside my door in a little bit.
Okay, perfect. So we got animals involved here today.
takes a village.
Yeah, really.
Well, I'm thinking, Greg, I'm glad we could do this. And I was mentioning earlier, I'm especially excited about this conversation because you and I share two great loves: music and talking shop. And probably right behind that, we love our work and we love Netflix original TV shows. So there's a lot to talk about here.
We kind of delve into the detail, don't we? Maybe a little too much.
I'm going to filter that under. It's a sign of genius as opposed to insanity. How's that?
Yeah.
At least in our own minds.
And a touch of OCD, or maybe a little more than a touch.
You're worth getting to know. You've worked with thousands of people on what I guess would be thousands, if not tens of thousands of projects. As guitarist, producer, arranger, list goes on. You've done sound libraries. Let's talk about a few career highlights. This is a time where you can brag a little bit.
Well, it's interesting. Like anybody that's ever started, you basically start out playing, joining bands, going through that whole route, right? Come from upstate New York. I moved to LA. It was either New York City or LA, and then just started playing with bands and got my feet wet. But just by chance, I was recommended by a really good friend of mine. His name is Zamp Nicole. Recommended me to a composer named Corey Lirius, who was in a band called Pablo Cruz, who anybody that was around in the 70s, I think it was probably later 70s, they had a bunch of hits, kind of a California-based band, the whole vibe. Anyway, he recommended me to Corey, who was, at the time, he had just written Max Headroom, which was kind of on one of those early shows that kind of took off. And then he got the Baywatch gig, scoring, and he needed a guitar player. And I was like, at first it was a little embarrassing, to be honest. Not the work part, but just to say, hey, I'm working on Baywatch, because it was one of those shows where it's like kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing, at least within the industry, And
anybody who's around then, it's like almost like they get it.
Yeah, it's kind of
a huge show, enormous show.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be comedy, but it kind of was for us behind the scenes a little bit. Especially back then, we were actually scoring and playing to picture, which I think TV is probably a lot different now, being that I went into the library world, writing for libraries, where it's a lot of music editors kind of, editing existing music to picture, which, my good friend Zamp was an editor as well. Kind of got me involved in that whole thing. So I started working with Corey on Baywatch, and at that time there were a lot of TV movies of the week, and he was doing all kinds of stuff, and I was kind of the guy. Okay, so I would have to say that's a highlight, because it was such an education, for me, coming from bands, a little bit of touring, clubs, the whole, 9 yards. I had done some session work with bands and, stuff like that, and as a guitarist, but not a bunch. So that kind of opened the door for me to really get familiar with, that world.
And it was high profile too. It was very high profile.
Yeah, I never really thought about it. Kind of, you just kind of just fall into each thing, and it is what it is. And I wasn't one to think about it in that way. I've always been kind of just wanted to work,
Let me ask, Greg. But this is so you're doing this. You're working on the television side of it. You're also a producer. You're an engineer. What about the sound libraries side of you and I never talk about this. You work with some sound libraries, don't you?
Yeah, well, how the sound library thing started was I played on Baywatch with Corey and his partner John, and for 6 years, I think it was. It was during the Pamela Anderson years, which was the heyday of that show, and that was a pretty good run, and it was cool. But I started to branch out more, and other composers started hiring me as well for a lot of these. I guess, the reality show thing, the library stuff. I just saw the writing on the wall in that it was kind of early on when stuff like, remember the Line 6 pod, that little red kidney-shaped box?
Revolutionary product at the time, too. Revolutionary.
Yeah, all these composers that were hiring me, of course, will want to be guitar players. They're keyboard player based, but they want to play guitar because, doesn't everybody? It's kind of one of the most expressive instruments. And anyway, I started feeling like they would, if there was like a background cue that was not featuring the as far as the guitar goes, they ended up playing it. And I started getting called a little less. And I would be brought in for more feature guitar stuff. And I thought, this is not good for me in that way. And I was always, writing cues on the side, for the shows, kind of almost, as a ghost, basically. I was getting paid and all that, got royalty money, but I wasn't credited as far as on the screen. And I just basically started thinking, I better start writing and getting other stuff out there. So I started contacting, some libraries, music libraries, and started having some luck with that. I just started submitting material and just started getting hired, to write stuff that turned out great.
And you're still working on those. You still do some work on those, don't you?
I still do, but it's again, like, this industry is changing so much as time goes on. Yes, I do write, but I'm only writing for one at the moment because they're the only music library that actually pays me to write. and a lot of these other music
when that happens.
Yeah, well, they used to do that back in the day, where you'd actually get hired to write a project and they wanted it to be genre, pick your genre, whatever. Yeah. Well, it also helped me with getting familiar with writing for a lot of different genres. I was always pretty versatile and being able to do a lot of things, but I took on projects that were probably bigger and more than I maybe should have, but I thought it was, a challenge. Well, the engineering thing just became part of when I started doing the library stuff. I had to, do the whole Pro Tools studio thing, and I had to just learn it. And I've also had the good fortune of being around really good engineers. My whole life, I just became close with engineers just because it was a natural thing. I love what they do. I really respect what they do. And guys like, it started out really guys like Robert Feist, who any of like the guitar freaks out there, he did the early Alan Holdsworth stuff, Road Games, Metal Fatigue, and Alan died a couple years back, but he's a legend. He's just, ridiculous. Anyway, I was able to meet Alan when Robert was doing that, and I was just always sponging up, the techniques of what these great, and then guys like Ken Allardyce, and then most recently, Alan Sanderson, who I do a lot of work with and have for the last many years. We won't count the years.
The great Alan Sanderson. When you do with Alan, you're doing production, arrangements, and you're a guitarist in his studio.
and also writing songs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of writers that come through that studio that need songwriting help, or just want to, And there's his wife Talon Ray, who I do a lot of writing with her, with other singer songwriters.
Yep.
She's kind of like a big vocal coach in the San Diego area.
And they're based here in San Diego. They're based here in San Diego.
Yeah, Alan's studio, Pacific Beat Recording, is an awesome little kind of, you were there, so we met.
Incredible.
Yeah, a boutique style studio that just has everything going, and Alan's awesome, and it's just a kind of a great team of, we kind of just fill in the blank. I mean, he's an engineer, of the highest order. I kind of just do it from my home studio. And again, getting back to the library thing, I learned it because I had to. And the budget is, and they said, okay, you're going to make X amount of dollars. And I couldn't afford to bring in an engineer. And I also couldn't afford to bring in other players because I needed to make that money. So I got really familiar with guitar synth.
Yeah.
As you also know, so all my keyboard work, string arrangements, everything is done on guitar synth in Pro Tools. And so I could just manipulate it and make it feel right, So that's why I got pretty good as an engineer as well as an editor.
That's one of the things I love. I mean, I'll hear some of your string arrangements. I remember, we met because you worked with my wife, Gloria Taylor, on her incredible folk pop album, Go for the Moon, which came out 2 years ago, actually right around this time, summer solstice 2018. And
yeah.
She was auditioning producers and engineers, and she said, well, I heard about this guy through Alan Sanderson, Gregg Montante, and you sent her a sound clip of some strings you did on a it was like a rock pop tune, and I actually heard it. You don't know the story. I heard it and I go, he did those strings? She goes, yeah, I guess he did them with his guitar, MIDI and so forth, and string libraries. I just go, that's your guy. So just saying.
Yeah, well, I've got pretty good with it being that I think the way I think about it is that I can play each string line separately instead of, there's keyboard play. I mean, everybody does different. Some keyboard players end up playing a lot of chords together with the strings, and it ends up sounding more, chordal.
Like a keyboard, not a string arrangement.
Right, like if you're writing for a string quartet or something, I'm writing each line separately. The cello line, the viola line, the violin lines, all the stuff. I can just work with it, and I got really comfortable through the years of thanks to MIDI and Pro Tools and any other program that's out there where you can just learn the art and the craft of learning that and studying it. I've always been really attracted to strings, and since I was a kid. I mean, I still have a dream of recording a guitar record with an orchestra. Just something about that just gets me every time. There's very few people that have done it. Jeff Beck did something a few years back. Klaus Ogerman was one of my favorite arrangers for strings and stuff that did it, an album many years ago with Keith Jarrett, and more of a jazz thing. But as far as styles go and all that, I'm kind of grateful that I grew up where music wasn't quite in the box that it is now, and that it's evolved, or it was much more open. And I just heard so much, which is, again, getting back to just as far as styles go, I can kind of comfortably move from one genre to the next because I don't really think, I'm certainly not a purist of any style.
You did something really interesting too. We were talking, I think, about it had been Taylor Swift 1989, or an album that was big. We were probably talking about this in 2018, so it had come out a few years earlier. And you'd said something about you had a client who was looking for a particular sound. You go, oh, I just study those albums. You're a student of sonics. I mean, you're listening to what's happening, and there's a lot of nuance to production. It's not just the sound; it's the feel. It's the way it's mixed. And I find that you're a chameleon. You're able to actually nail not only the sound but the feel, and the feel is one of the hardest things to recreate. In other words, I
You know
picture
what?
you at 1 in the mornings, you know, sort of holed up, listening to that, recreating that sort of thing, you know, coming up with it. It's cool.
Yeah, you know what? I am pretty obsessive with when I hear something, chasing it down, and yeah, I'm just a student, and I always will be of everything that's out there. And if I like something, um, I just figure it out, and that's just an ear thing that I just developed early on. I mean, I come from the era of albums, and as far as your ears developing, although I mean, kids have much more of an advantage today because this they can go on YouTube and learn. Not only they could listen to an album and go, how do you do that? You've got a guy or thousands of guys showing them exactly how to play it on the fingerboard, the sound, every aspect of it. Whereas back in the day, I just had to figure it out, and that's why early sheet music and stuff like that, I kind of didn't even bother with because I realized it wasn't like the record.
Yeah.
I learned the records and the specifics to the playing, to the sound, to the voicings, to how it interacted with all the other instrumentation. So I just became obsessed with that really early on, and I just wanted to know who were the players on these records. Like yourself, we're very geeky about that, but they're, I think it's kind of important because there's certain players and production and writers that bring something to the table that has more lasting value than others. And there's just a depth to it, and there's just something there that you can't write it on. It's just a felt thing. True. When I approach any production, I really am careful to make sure that I don't really want to be involved in a production that gets dated like the minute you're done with it. It's like I try to convince whoever I'm working with to go, okay, think about it. We're working on this now. By the time it sees the light of day and you're into whatever this is right now, I think it's not a great idea. It just needs to be really honest in what you really love, and don't worry about, because especially synth sounds and certain sounds that kind of go, periods. They get dated really fast, as you know as well.
That's going to dovetail into the next part of our conversation. And
okay, cool.